Sarah Chen stared at the shimmering hologram, her heart pounding in her chest. The alien symbols danced before her eyes, a symphony of curves and angles that seemed to defy human comprehension. But not to Sarah. To her, they sang a song of meaning, each glyph a note in a complex melody of alien thought. "I've got it," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the crowded command center. Around her, dozens of the world's top linguists and cryptographers hunched over consoles, their faces etched with frustration. For 3 weeks, they had labored day and night to decipher the message that had arrived from the depths of space, carried on a beam of exotic particles that Earth's scientists were only beginning to understand. Sarah's supervisor, Dr. Elias Vega, looked up from his own terminal with a mixture of skepticism and hope. "You've cracked it. All of it." Sarah nodded, her fingers flying over her keyboard as she input the translation. It's an invitation," she said, her voice growing stronger as the full import of the message became clear. "They call themselves the Zolthori. They've been watching us, studying us from afar, and now they want to meet." A hush fell over the room as Sarah's translation appeared on the main screen. Disbelief gave way to awe as the assembled experts realized that this unassuming woman, often overlooked and underestimated throughout her career, had accomplished in hours what had eluded them for weeks. "My God," Dr. Vega breathed. "Sarah, do you realize what you've done? You've just become the most important person on the planet." Sarah barely heard him. Her mind was already racing ahead, dissecting the nuances of the Zolthori language, uncovering layers of meaning that others had missed. "There's more," she said, her excitement building. "They're not just inviting us to talk. They want us to visit them, to send a delegation to their homeworld." The command center erupted in a cacophony of voices, questions and exclamations overlapping as the implications sank in. But Sarah remained focused, her eyes never leaving the alien script. There was something about the way the Zolthori constructed their sentences, a subtle inflection in their use of tense and mood, that nagged at her. "Dr. Chen," a new voice cut through the din. Sarah looked up to see General Harriet Stanton, the head of Earth's newly formed extraterrestrial contact division, striding towards her. "I need you to brief the President and the UN Security Council in 1 hour. Can you do that?" Sarah swallowed hard, feeling the weight of history settling on her shoulders. "Yes, ma'am. I'll be ready." As she gathered her notes and prepared for the most important presentation of her life, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial. The Zolthori message was friendly, even welcoming on the surface. But there was an undercurrent, a subtle tension in the phrasing that set her nerves on edge. What aren't they telling us, she wondered, and why did they choose now to make contact? The next few hours passed in a blur of high-level briefings and urgent strategy sessions. Sarah found herself at the center of a whirlwind of activity, her expertise suddenly in demand by the most powerful people on Earth. As the gravity of the situation sank in, governments around the world scrambled to formulate a response to the Zolthori invitation. It was past midnight when Sarah finally returned to her small apartment, her mind reeling from the day's events. She collapsed onto a couch, too wired to sleep despite her exhaustion. Her gaze fell on a framed photo of her parents, both brilliant linguists in their own right, who had died in a car accident when Sarah was in college. "I wish you could see this, Mom and Dad," she murmured. "You always said language was the key to understanding the universe. I guess you were more right than you knew." A soft chime from her secure comm unit jolted Sarah from her reverie. It was a message from General Stanton. "Dr. Chen, report to Andrews Air Force Base at 600. Pack for an extended journey. You're going to the stars." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. They had chosen her. Out of all the brilliant minds on Earth, they had chosen her to be humanity's voice in the first face-to-face meeting with an alien civilization. The enormity of the responsibility threatened to overwhelm her. But as the initial shock wore off, a fierce determination took its place. Sarah Chen, the quiet, unassuming xenolinguist who had spent her career being underestimated and overlooked, was about to make history, and she was damned if she was going to let humanity down. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Sarah stood at her window, gazing up at the stars that would soon be her destination. Somewhere out there, the Zolfori were waiting, and Sarah had a feeling that the fate of two civilizations would hinge on her ability to understand not just their words, but the thoughts and intentions behind them. With a deep breath, she turned away from the window and began to pack. The greatest adventure in human history was about to begin, and Sarah Chen was ready to face whatever challenges the universe had in store. The next morning, Andrews Air Force Base hummed with barely contained excitement. A small group of Earth's finest, scientists, diplomats, and military personnel, gathered on the tarmac, their faces a mix of anticipation and nerves. At the center of it all stood Sarah, clutching her datapad and trying to project a confidence she didn't entirely feel. General Stanton approached, her crisp uniform a stark contrast to the rumpled appearance of the civilians around her. "Dr. Chen, are you ready? Once we board that ship, there's no turning back. The fate of our entire species may rest on the outcome of this mission." Sarah met the general's steely gaze and nodded. "I'm ready, ma'am. Whatever happens up there, I'll make sure we understand it." As they boarded the sleek spacecraft that would take them to the Zolfori rendezvous point, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something vital. The alien message, for all its apparent friendliness, held secrets she had yet to unravel. "But I will," she vowed silently as the engines roared to life. "For the sake of humanity, I'll unlock every secret the Zolfori are hiding." The ship lifted off, carrying Sarah and her fellow ambassadors towards an uncertain future among the stars. As Earth receded behind them, Sarah felt a mix of terror and exhilaration. Whatever lay ahead, she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The immense void of space stretched out before the viewing port, an endless expanse of darkness, punctuated by distant pinpricks of light. Sarah Chen pressed her hand against the cool, transparent steel, marveling at the sight. After 3 weeks of travel at speeds that defied human comprehension, they were finally approaching the rendezvous point with the Zolfori. "Magnificent, isn't it?" A deep voice rumbled beside her. Sarah turned to see Dr. Marcus Reeves, the mission's chief xenobiologist, gazing out at the stars. "Makes you feel small, doesn't it?" Sarah nodded, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "Small, yes, but also significant. Out of all that vastness, we're the ones chosen to make first contact. It's humbling and terrifying at the same time." Reeves chuckled, his weathered face creasing with amusement. "Well said, Dr. Chen. I couldn't agree more." As they stood in companionable silence, Sarah reflected on the journey so far. The crew of 20, a carefully selected mix of scientists, diplomats, and military personnel, had spent the past weeks in intense preparation. Every waking moment was filled with briefings, simulations, and heated debates about how to present humanity to an advanced alien civilization. But beneath the professional facade, tensions simmered. Cultural differences and conflicting agendas threatened to fracture the unity of the team. Sarah had found herself acting as a mediator more than once, her skills as a linguist proving invaluable in bridging the gaps between her crewmates. A sudden commotion down the corridor broke Sarah from her reverie. Raised voices echoed through the ship's sleek interior, growing louder by the second. With a shared look of concern, Sarah and Dr. Reeves hurried towards the source of the disturbance. They found Lieutenant Commander Axel Donovan, the mission's military liaison, in a heated argument with Dr. Amelia Frost, a brilliant but acerbic astrobiologist. The two were nose to nose, their faces flushed with anger. "I'm telling you, Frost, we need to be prepared for any eventuality," Donovan was saying, his voice tight with frustration. "We can't just assume these aliens have our best interests at heart." Dr. Frost sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "And I'm telling you, Commander, that your paranoid military mindset is going to sabotage his entire mission before it even begins. The Zolthori invited us as guests, not as potential combatants. Sarah stepped between them, her hands raised placatingly. Please, both of you, let's take a step back. We're all under immense pressure, but we can't afford to let it divide us. Not now, when we're so close to our goal. Donovan and Frost glared at each other for a moment longer before reluctantly backing down. Sarah could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. She knew that this confrontation was just a symptom of a deeper problem, the fundamental uncertainty that lay at the heart of their mission. As the group dispersed, Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Captain Elena Vasquez, the ship's commander, giving her an approving nod. Nice work, Dr. Chen. I'm beginning to think your skills as a peacekeeper are just as valuable as your linguistic abilities. Sarah smiled ruefully. I just hope I can be as effective when we're dealing with the Zolthori. At least with humans, I have some frame of reference. Captain Vasquez's expression grew serious. About that, we've just received a transmission from the Zolthori vessel. They'll be arriving at the rendezvous point in less than 6 hours. I need you on the bridge to help coordinate our response. Sarah's heart rate spiked, a mixture of excitement and apprehension flooding through her. This was it, the moment they had all been preparing for. As she followed Captain Vasquez to the bridge, her mind raced with possibilities. What would the Zolthori be like in person? Would her understanding of their language hold up in real-time conversation? And most importantly, what did they truly want from humanity? The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The entire crew was on high alert, running final system checks and reviewing protocols for first contact. Sarah found herself at the heart of it all, fine-tuning the translation algorithms and preparing for every possible communication scenario. As the countdown to the Zolthori's arrival entered its final minutes, an expectant hush fell over the bridge. Sarah stood at her station, her fingers hovering over her console, ready to facilitate the most important conversation in human history. Suddenly, a brilliant flash of light erupted in the space before them. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as a ship materialized, a vast, gleaming construct that dwarfed their own vessel. Its surface seemed to ripple and shift, defying the laws of physics as humans understood them. My God, someone whispered behind her. It's beautiful. Before anyone could react further, a transmission cut through the awed silence. Alien glyphs scrolled across Sarah's screen, a symphony of meaning that only she could fully comprehend. Her fingers flew over the keys, translating in real time. Greetings, children of Earth, Sarah read aloud, her voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. We are the Zolthori, and we welcome you to the stars. Please, come aboard our vessel. There is much we have to discuss. Captain Vasquez stepped forward, her voice clear and confident as she addressed the alien ship. On behalf of humanity, we thank you for your invitation. We are honored to accept. As the crew prepared for boarding, Sarah couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. There was something in the Zolthori's message, a subtle undercurrent that she couldn't quite pin down. It wasn't hostility, exactly, but rather a sense of urgency, desperation. Whatever it was, it set her nerves on edge. The docking procedure was smoother than anyone had dared to hope. As the airlock cycled open, Sarah found herself at the forefront of the boarding party, her heart pounding in her chest. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead. The interior of the Zolthori ship was a marvel of alien engineering, all sweeping curves and pulsing bioluminescent surfaces. But it was the beings that awaited them that truly took Sarah's breath away. The Zolthori stood nearly 8 feet tall, their bodies a mesmerizing blend of crystalline structures and flowing, liquid-like membranes. Multiple limbs moved with impossible grace, and their faces, if they could be called faces, were a kaleidoscope of shifting patterns and colors. One of the aliens stepped forward, its body language radiating what Sarah interpreted as a gesture of welcome. It spoke, its voice a harmonious blend of tones that seemed to resonate in Sarah's very bones. "Welcome, Sarah Chen," the alien said, its words flowing through Sarah's translation algorithm. "We have long awaited this moment. You, who have unlocked the key to our language, will play a crucial role in what is to come." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. How did they know her name? And what did they mean by a crucial role? She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could form the words, a wave of dizziness washed over her. The world began to spin, colors blurring together in a psychedelic whirl. The last thing Sarah saw before losing consciousness was the face of the Zalthori looming over her, its patterns shifting into what she could have sworn was an expression of concern, or was it triumph? As darkness claimed her, Sarah's final coherent thought was a realization that chilled her to her core. They had prepared for every possibility except the one that was now unfolding. Whatever the Zalthori truly wanted, it was clear that humanity was woefully unprepared for the challenges that lay ahead. The fate of two civilizations now hung in the balance, and Sarah Chen was at the very center of it all. Sarah Chen awoke with a start, her head pounding and her vision blurry. As her eyes slowly focused, she found herself in a room unlike anything she had ever seen. The walls seemed to pulse with an inner light, shifting colors in a hypnotic dance that made it difficult to judge the space's dimensions. "Dr. Chen, are you all right?" A familiar voice cut through her confusion. Sarah turned to see Dr. Marcus Reeves sitting beside her, concern etched on his face. I think so," Sarah managed, her voice hoarse. "What happened? Where are we?" Reeves helped her sit up, his movements cautious. "We're in some kind of medical bay on the Zalthori ship. You collapsed during the initial meeting. They insisted on treating you themselves, said our medical technology was too primitive to handle whatever happened." Sarah's mind raced, trying to piece together her fragmented memories. The others? The rest of the team? "They're fine," Reeves assured her. "A bit shaken up, but unharmed. The Zalthori have been surprisingly accommodating." Before Sarah could respond, a shimmering portal appeared in the wall, and two Zalthori glided into the room. Their crystalline bodies refracted the ambient light, creating a dazzling display that Sarah found both beautiful and slightly unsettling. One of the aliens stepped forward, its body language conveying what Sarah interpreted as concern. "Sarah Chen," it said, its melodious voice translated seamlessly by the implant she hadn't realized she was wearing. "We apologize for the discomfort you experienced. The neural interface required for true communication can be overwhelming for species unused to such connections." Sarah's hand flew to her temple, feeling a small, smooth bump just beneath the skin. "Neural interface," she echoed, a mix of fascination and alarm coursing through her. The Zalthori's patterns shifted in what might have been the alien equivalent of a nod. "A necessary measure, we assure you. It allows for perfect translation and understanding between our species. We had not anticipated the strength of your mind. It caused a temporary overload." Reeves stood, his posture tense. "You implanted technology in her brain without consent? That's a violation of—" The second Zalthori interrupted, its tone soothing. "Peace, Dr. Reeves. The interface is temporary and non-invasive. It can be removed at any time. But we believe you will find it invaluable for the tasks ahead." Sarah's scientific curiosity began to override her initial alarm. She focused on the Zalthori, surprised to find that she could now perceive subtle nuances in their communication that had been invisible before. "What tasks?" she asked. "Why did you really invite us here?" The aliens exchanged a look that Sarah somehow knew conveyed both approval and trepidation. "Come," the first one said. "It is time we showed you our world, and the reason for your presence here." What followed was a whirlwind tour that left Sarah and her fellow humans breathless with wonder. The Zalthori ship, they learned, was not just a vessel but a gateway, a mobile extension of their homeworld that allowed for instantaneous travel across vast distances. As they stepped through another shimmering portal, Sarah gasped. They stood atop a towering spire, overlooking an alien metropolis that defied description. Crystalline structures rose impossibly high into a sky swirling with colors Sarah had no names for. Vehicles that seemed to bend the very fabric of space zipped between buildings, while far below, countless Zolfori went about their incomprehensible lives. "Welcome," the guide said, a note of pride in its harmonious voice, to Zalfor Prime. The next few days were a blur of discovery and diplomacy. The human delegation was given unprecedented access to Zalfori technology and culture. Sarah found herself at the center of it all, her enhanced linguistic abilities making her the de facto bridge between the two species. But as the initial awe began to fade, Sarah's innate skepticism reasserted itself. There was something off about the whole situation. The Zalfori were forthcoming with information about their history, their scientific achievements, even their biology. But whenever the conversation turned to the reason for humanity's invitation, they became evasive. It was during a tour of what the Zalfori called the Nexus, a vast, pulsing construct at the heart of their city, that Sarah's suspicions crystallized into certainty. The Nexus, their guide explained, is the culmination of our species' advancement. It allows us to manipulate the very fabric of reality, to bridge gaps between dimensions and harness energies beyond your comprehension. Sarah studied the swirling energies contained within the Nexus, her enhanced perception allowing her to see patterns and connections that should have been impossible. And then, like a bolt of lightning, understanding struck. "It's failing," she'd breathed, the words escaping before she could stop them. The Zalfori guide froze, its crystalline form seeming to dim slightly. "What do you mean, Sarah Chen?" Sarah pointed to a barely perceptible fluctuation in the Nexus's energy field. "There and there. The patterns are degrading. You're losing control, aren't you? That's why you brought us here. You need help." A heavy silence fell over the group. The Zolfori's colors shifted rapidly, conveying a complex mix of emotions that Sarah was only beginning to understand. Finally, it spoke. "You are correct, Sarah Chen. The Nexus, the source of our civilization's greatness, is destabilizing. If it fails entirely, it will tear not just our world, but countless others apart." Lieutenant Commander Donovan stepped forward, his face hard. "And you thought to drag humanity into this without full disclosure? Do you have any idea of the danger you've put us in?" The Zolfori's patterns conveyed deep regret. "We feared that if we revealed the full truth, you would refuse to help. Your species is young, but you possess a unique perspective, a creativity and adaptability that our ancient civilization has lost. We believe you may see solutions where we cannot." Sarah's mind raced, processing the implications. The fate of not just two civilizations, but potentially countless others, hung in the balance. And humanity, in all its messy, chaotic glory, might be the key to averting catastrophe. But before she could respond, alarms began to blare throughout the complex. The Nexus pulsed erratically, its energies flaring in a way that made Sarah's newly enhanced senses scream in warning. "What's happening?" Dr. Frost demanded, her earlier skepticism replaced by naked fear. The Zolfori guide's colors paled to an almost translucent state. "A cascade failure," it said, its harmonious voice now discordant with panic. "We're out of time." As chaos erupted around them, Sarah locked eyes with Captain Vasquez. In that moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them. Whatever the risks, whatever the consequences, they couldn't stand by and watch a civilization fall. "Tell us what you need," Sarah said, turning back to the Zalfori. "We'll help however we can." As the Nexus's energies continued to spiral out of control, Sarah realized that the true test of humanity's worth on the galactic stage was about to begin. The skills and knowledge she had spent a lifetime acquiring were about to be put to the ultimate test. With a deep breath, Sarah Chen, the unlikely ambassador who had become humanity's voice among the stars, prepared to face a challenge that would shape the destiny of worlds. The fate of two civilizations now rested on the shoulders of a species that had only just taken its first steps beyond its own planet. But if there was one thing Sarah knew about humanity, it was this. When pushed to the brink, her species had a habit of achieving the impossible. As alarms blared and the very fabric of reality trembled around them, Sarah allowed herself a grim smile. It was time to show the Zalthori and the universe exactly what humanity was capable of. The Nexus chamber pulsed with chaotic energy, its once harmonious rhythms now a discordant symphony of impending disaster. Sarah Chen stood at the center of the maelstrom, her enhanced senses struggling to process the overwhelming input. Around her, Zalthori scientists worked feverishly at control panels, their crystalline forms flickering with stress and fear. "We need to stabilize the primary resonance field," Dr. Frost shouted over the din, her earlier skepticism forgotten in the face of the crisis. She worked alongside a Zalthori physicist, their movements a coordinated dance of desperation. Sarah's mind raced, correlating the vast amounts of data flowing through her neural interface. Patterns emerged, connections formed, and suddenly... "Wait," she cried out, her voice cutting through the chaos. "The destabilization, it's not random. Look at the fluctuation patterns in the gamma sector." Captain Vasquez appeared at her side, her face grim. "What are you seeing, Dr. Chen?" Sarah's fingers flew over a holographic display, highlighting a series of energy spikes. These variations, they're too regular to be natural decay. Someone, or something, is deliberately sabotaging the Nexus. A ripple of shock passed through both humans and Zalthori. The alien elder who had been their primary guide stepped forward, its colors muted with disbelief. "Impossible. The Nexus is the heart of our civilization. No Zalthori would ever." Perhaps not willingly, Lieutenant Commander Donovan interjected, his military training kicking in. But what if they're being coerced? Or if it's not a Zalthori at all? The implications hung heavy in the air. If there was an infiltrator, a saboteur in the heart of Zalthori civilization, the danger was far greater than they had initially believed. Sarah's mind whirled with possibilities. "We need access to your security systems, full access. If there's a pattern to these sabotage attempts, we might be able to predict the next one and catch them in the act." The Zalthori elder hesitated, its colors shifting in a complex dance of internal conflict. Finally, it extended a crystalline appendage, interfacing directly with a nearby console. "You have full access, Sarah Chen. The fate of our world is in your hands." What followed was a race against time that pushed both species to their limits. Sarah, her linguistic skills now augmented by the neural interface's data processing capabilities, became the nexus of a joint human-Zalthori task force. They combed through centuries of data, looking for any anomaly, any hint of the hidden threat that sought to bring down an entire civilization. Days blurred together, sleep became a distant memory, and the line between human and alien began to blur as they worked in perfect synchronization. And then, buried deep in the archives, Sarah found it. "Here," she exclaimed, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Look at these maintenance logs from 3 centuries ago. There's a series of micro-adjustments to the Nexus's core algorithms, so subtle they were overlooked at the time, but compounded over centuries." Dr. Rees leaned in, his eyes widening as he grasped the implications. "My God, it's brilliant in its simplicity. Whoever did this played the long game, setting up a cascade failure that would take generations to manifest." "But why?" Captain Vasquez asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. What could possibly be worth destroying an entire civilization for? The answer came from an unexpected source. Lieutenant Commander Donovan, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly straightened, his face pale. "It's not about destroying the Zalthori," he said slowly. "It's about weaponizing the Nexus itself." All eyes turned to him as he continued, his voice gaining strength. "Think about it. The Nexus can manipulate the fabric of reality, bridge dimensions. In the right hands, or the wrong ones, it could be the ultimate weapon, a way to reshape the universe itself." The Zolfori Elder's colors paled to an almost translucent state. If this is true, then the threat is greater than we could have imagined. Not just to our world, but to all worlds. Sarah's mind raced, connecting dots that had been invisible before. The invitation to Earth, the neural interfaces. You suspected something like this, didn't you? You needed outside help, minds that weren't bound by centuries of Zolfori thinking. The Elder's patterns shifted in what Sarah now recognized as reluctant acknowledgement. We had suspicions, but we dared not voice them, even to ourselves. The implications were too terrible to contemplate. A heavy silence fell over the group, the weight of the revelation pressing down on them all. They had come seeking diplomatic ties and scientific exchange, only to find themselves at the center of a plot that threatened the very fabric of the universe. It was Captain Vasquez who finally broke the silence, her voice steel. "All right, people, we've identified the threat. Now we need a plan to neutralize it. Dr. Chen, you're our expert on Zolfori language and culture. What do you need to track down our saboteur?" Sarah took a deep breath, centering herself. "I need a small team. Humans and Zolfori, the best of both species. We'll need to go off-grid, operate outside official channels. Whoever is behind this has had centuries to infiltrate every level of Zolfori society. We can't trust anyone outside this room." Donovan nodded approvingly. "A covered op. I like it. I'm in." Dr. Frost stepped forward, her earlier skepticism replaced by fierce determination. "You'll need a scientist who understands the nexus. I'm coming too." One by one, a team formed around Sarah. Humans and Zolfori, united by a common purpose that transcended the boundaries of species. As they prepared to embark on their desperate mission, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She had come to Zalthor as a linguist, an ambassador. Now she found herself at the center of a cosmic chess game, with the fate of universes hanging in the balance. "Whatever happens," she addressed her team, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her gut. "Remember this. We're not just fighting for Earth or for Zalthor. We're fighting for every world, every species that calls this universe home. Failure is not an option." As they moved out, slipping away from the Nexus chamber and into the shadowy underbelly of Zolfori society, Sarah allowed herself one last look at the magnificent alien city. Somewhere out there, a threat lurked, patient, ancient, and utterly ruthless. But they had one advantage the enemy couldn't account for: the indomitable human spirit, now allied with the ancient wisdom of the Zolfori. With a silent prayer to whatever forces might be watching over them, Sarah Chen, linguist turned cosmic detective, led her team into the unknown. The hunt was on, and the clock was ticking. The underbelly of Zalfo Prime was a stark contrast to the gleaming spires above. Here, in the shadowy depths of the alien metropolis, Sarah Chen and her makeshift team moved with purpose, their every step a calculated risk. According to the data we extracted, there should be an access node to the Nexus's secondary control grid just ahead, Dr. Frost whispered, her eyes glued to a holographic display projected from her wrist device. Lieutenant Commander Donovan, taking point, held up a closed fist, the universal signal to halt. "Movement ahead," he murmured, his enhanced senses, courtesy of the Zolfori neural interface, picking up minute vibrations in the air. Sarah focused, allowing the alien technology merged with her mind to process the incoming data. "It's a maintenance drone," she said after a moment. "Non-sentient, but if we trigger its sensors, it'll alert security." Their Zolfori companion, a young scientist named Zalin, shifted its crystalline form to emit a soft, pulsing light. "I can mimic the drone's control frequency. It should allow us to pass undetected." As Zalin's light patterns changed, the drone hovering at the intersection ahead paused, then continued on its predetermined path, oblivious to the intruders. "Nice work," Donovan said, nodding appreciatively at Zalin. They pressed on, delving deeper into the forgotten layers of Zolfori infrastructure. Sarah marveled at how seamlessly their team had come together, humans and aliens working in perfect synchronization, their strengths complementing each other in ways neither species could have anticipated. After what felt like hours of tense navigation through twisting corridors and ancient machinery, they reached their goal, a massive pulsing node that seemed to breathe with barely contained energy. "This is it," Dr. Frost said, her voice hushed with awe. "A direct line to the Nexus's core systems. If we can isolate the saboteurs' access points from here, we might be able to trace them back to the source." As Frost and Zalin began their delicate work, interfacing their equipment with the alien technology, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Something wasn't right. The neural interface was picking up something, a presence, just at the edge of perception. "We're not alone," she said suddenly, her body tensing. "Everyone, be on guard." No sooner had the words left her mouth than the air around them shimmered, revealing a dozen figures that seemed to materialize from the very walls. They were Zolthori in form, but there was something off about them. Their crystalline bodies were darker, shot through with veins of pulsing, malevolent energy. "Void walkers," Zalin gasped, its colors paling with fear. "They're supposed to be a myth, a bogeyman story told to scare young Zolthori. Creatures corrupted by exposure to the spaces between realities." The leader of the Void Walkers stepped forward, its voice a discordant hiss that grated against Sarah's enhanced senses. "Your interference ends here, creatures of flesh and light. The Nexus will fall, and the barriers between worlds will crumble. Our masters will feast on the chaos that follows." Donovan didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, he drew his weapon, a prototype based on Zalthori energy manipulation technology, and fired. The blast caught the lead Void Walker square in the chest, sending it reeling back. "Frost, Zalin, keep working," Sarah shouted as chaos erupted around them. "We'll hold them off." What followed was a battle unlike anything in human history. Energy blasts crisscrossed the chamber as Donovan and Sarah fought back to back, their movements guided by the neural interface's superhuman reflexes. Zalin joined the fray, its body pulsing with defensive light patterns that seemed to confuse and disorient the Void Walkers. But they were outnumbered and outgunned. For every Void Walker they managed to down, two more seemed to take its place. Sarah felt her strength waning, the constant barrage of sensory input from the neural interface threatening to overwhelm her. Just when all seemed lost, a new sound cut through the din of battle, a high-pitched whine that made Sarah's teeth ache. The Void Walkers recoiled, their dark forms writhing in apparent agony. "It's done," Dr. Frost yelled triumphantly. "I've isolated their access protocols and inverted the energy signature. It's driving them back." Sure enough, the Void Walkers were retreating, their bodies seeming to dissolve into wisps of dark energy. But their leader remained, its form flickering but defiant. "You've won nothing," it snarled. "The cascade has already begun. In less than 6 hours, the Nexus will collapse and all your worlds will burn." With a final hateful glare, the creature vanished, leaving behind only the echoes of its chilling prophecy. Silence fell over the chamber as the team regrouped, battered but alive. Sarah's mind raced, processing the implications of what they'd learned. 6 hours, she murmured. "We have 6 hours to save everything." Captain Vasquez's voice crackled over their comm units, tense with barely contained urgency. "Chen, report. We're detecting massive energy fluctuations across the entire Nexus network." Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for the challenge ahead. "Captain, the situation is worse than we thought. We've confirmed the existence of a hostile force, extra-dimensional entities using corrupted Zalthori as agents. They've triggered a final cascade. We have less than 6 hours before total Nexus collapse." A moment of heavy silence followed. When Vasquez spoke again, her voice was iron. "Understood. What's our play, Dr. Chen?" Sarah looked around at her team, human and Zalthori, blood-eyed but unbowed. In their eyes, she saw not defeat, but determination. We have the key to the access protocols now, she said, a plan forming in her mind. If we can reach the primary nexus control chamber, we might be able to isolate the corrupt sectors and initiate a controlled shutdown. It'll cripple Zolfori technology for generations, but it beats the alternative. And if we fail? Donovan asked, ever the pragmatist. Sarah met his gaze unflinchingly. Then we take as many of those interdimensional bastards with us as we can. As the team prepared to make their final push, Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her. The fate of worlds rested on their shoulders, yet she felt no fear. This, she realized, was what humanity had been preparing for all along, the moment when they would stand tall among the stars, guardians not just of their own world, but of all worlds. Let's move, she said, her voice steady. We've got a universe to save. As they raced back towards the heart of Zalfor Prime, Sarah Chen, linguist, diplomat, and now reluctant cosmic hero, allowed herself a grim smile. Whatever the outcome, the next 6 hours would determine the fate of everything they knew. The final battle for the Nexus was about to begin. Donovan didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, he drew his weapon, a prototype based on Zalfori energy manipulation technology, and fired. The blast caught the lead Void Walker square in the chest, sending it reeling back. Frost, Zalin, keep working. Sarah shouted as chaos erupted around them. We'll hold them off. What followed was a battle unlike anything in human history. Energy blasts crisscrossed the chamber as Donovan and Sarah fought back to back, their movements guided by the neural interface's superhuman reflexes. Zalin joined the fray, its body pulsing with defensive light patterns that seemed to confuse and disorient the Void Walkers. But they were outnumbered and outgunned. For every Void Walker they managed to down, 2 more seemed to take its place. Sarah felt her strength waning, the constant barrage of sensory input from the neural interface threatening to overwhelm her. Just when all seemed lost, a new sound cut through the din of battle, a high-pitched whine that made Sarah's teeth ache. The Void Walkers recoiled, their dark forms writhing in apparent agony. It's done, Dr. Frost yelled triumphantly. I've isolated their access protocols and inverted the energy signature. It's driving them back. Sure enough, the Void Walkers were retreating, their bodies seeming to dissolve into wisps of dark energy. But their leader remained, its form flickering but defiant. You've won nothing, it snarled. The cascade has already begun. In less than 6 hours, the Nexus will collapse and all your worlds will burn. With a final, hateful glare, the creature vanished, leaving behind only the echoes of its chilling prophecy. Silence fell over the chamber as the team regrouped, battered but alive. Sarah's mind raced, processing the implications of what they'd learned. 6 hours, she murmured. We have 6 hours to save everything. Captain Vasquez's voice crackled over their comm units, tense with barely contained urgency. Chen report. We're detecting massive energy fluctuations across the entire Nexus network. Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for the challenge ahead. Captain, the situation is worse than we thought. We've confirmed the existence of a hostile force, extra-dimensional entities using corrupted Zalfori as agents. They've triggered a final cascade. We have less than 6 hours before total Nexus collapse. A moment of heavy silence followed. When Vasquez spoke again, her voice was iron. Understood. What's our play, Dr. Chen? Sarah looked around at her team, human and Zalfori, blood-eyed but unbowed. In their eyes, she saw not defeat, but determination. We have the key to their access protocols now, she said, a plan forming in her mind. If we can reach the primary Nexus control chamber, we might be able to isolate the corrupt sectors and initiate a controlled shutdown. It'll cripple Zolfori technology for generations, but it beats the alternative. And if we fail? Donovan asked, ever the pragmatist. Sarah met his gaze unflinchingly. Then we take as many of those interdimensional bastards with us as we can. As the team prepared to make their final push, Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her. The fate of worlds rested on their shoulders, yet she felt no fear. This, she realized, was what humanity had been preparing for all along. The moment when they would stand tall among the stars, guardians not just of their own world, but of all worlds. "Let's move," she said, her voice steady. "We've got a universe to save." As they raced back towards the heart of Zalfor Prime, Sarah Chen, linguist, diplomat, and now, reluctant cosmic hero, allowed herself a grim smile. Whatever the outcome, the next 6 hours would determine the fate of everything they knew. The final battle for the Nexus was about to begin.